So on today's show, we have Muhammad Sahimi. Muhammad is a professor of chemical engineering at USC and an expert on Iranian and U.S. foreign policy. Muhammad, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me in your program.
Oh, no problem. Thank you for being here. So you wrote this really insightful article called Pompeo, Bolton, and Iran's Fake Opposition, which highlights the differences between the Iranian groups that are opposed to the hardliners in the Iranian government. And I'll ask you first, what group is the true opposition? And then after we go through that, we can go into what you refer as the fake opposition.
Well, what I call the true oppositions are the groups that are in Iran and have been trying to move Iran towards a better political system, a better government, a more representative government, and democratic elections. This is actually a sort of a broad coalition. It consists of the reformists, those who want to reform the state very deeply, and their allies. And their allies in this struggle are a group that are called religious nationalists, for example, that had an important role at the beginning of the Iranian Revolution of 1979. Then we also have secular leftists that are scattered, but they do have a very important presence. We also have labor unions. There have been some strikes and demonstrations in Iran by labor unions. We also have teachers' unions. They also have been very active, asking for better pay, better benefits, and so on, and demonstrating and protesting the state of economy. And all of these groups have also been protesting the deep corruption within the establishment. And there is practically no week going by in which some new revelation from some major corruption is not made. So this is what I call the true opposition in Iran. They are in Iran. They are in the struggle. A lot of their activists have gone to jail. In fact, Iran has a few hundred political prisoners. So these are the true opposition. Now, what I call the fake opposition in the article that you mentioned are the groups that are outside Iran. And what they do is basically advocate what the Trump administration and its allies in the Middle East, including Saudi Arabia, United Arab Emirates, and Israel, have been advocating for Iran. So basically what they do is they have a lot of, television stations, satellite television stations that broadcast programs into Iran. They have many, many websites. They are very active in tweets and Facebook pages and Instagram and so on. What they basically advocate is what Trump, Pompeo, Bolton, Benjamin Netanyahu, Saudi Arabia, and so on advocate regarding Iran. In other words, they make Iran or Iran's political system an all-powerful evildoer, the way George W. Bush used to put it, and therefore justify whatever they want to do. Now, there is, of course, no question that Iranian government or Iranian political establishment has done a lot of things, particularly inside Iran, that are not desirable and they should be condemned, including violation of human rights, violation of rights of ethnic and religious minorities, and so on. And of course, there is always vast economic corruption. But we also know that at the same time that those in the Middle East that advocate a tough line against Iran are themselves violators of human rights, are themselves active in wars and so on. Just take a look at, for example, Saudi Arabia. Since almost 4 years ago, since March 29, 2015, we are getting to the fourth anniversary of it, Saudi Arabia and United Arab Emirates, with the support of the United States, have been attacking a poor country like Yemen, and they have devastated the country. Tens of thousands of people have died, several thousand children have died, and according to United Nations, 10 million people are in danger of dying of starvation. So when such a country takes a hard line against Iran, whose sins, while not negligible, doesn't even come close to what Saudi Arabia has done in that region, and when Iranian groups outside Iran that are active in this advocate and support the same hard line that Saudi Arabia, Israel, United Arab Emirates, and Trump administration take against Iran, then they basically have allied with the Iranian people enemies. At least at this stage, Saudi Arabia and other countries in that region are enemies of Iranian people, at least as far as I'm concerned, and therefore aligning yourself with them and advocating their lines against Iran is nothing short of being a fake opposition. They are not opposition. In fact, they are lobbies for these countries, and that was the main point that I discussed in that article that you mentioned.
So the true opposition, they're an organic opposition that doesn't have any outside influence, and then the fake opposition is they're subjugated to foreign influences. Do they have any support in Iran at all?
That's the point. Time and again, it has been demonstrated that they don't have any significant social base of support in Iran. In Iran, we have regular elections. We have elections for Iranian president. We have elections for the parliament. We have elections for city council. These elections are not democratic because the establishment does not allow everybody that wants to run actually run. They vet the candidates. However, these elections have always been, competitive and meaningful. They are meaningful in the sense that there is real competition of views among those that run, and they are also competitive because you cannot ever predict the outcome of the election. There is always fierce debate in the Iranian parliament. There is always harsh criticism of various factions, both against the government and against each other, and so on. Now, on every occasion when these national elections are held, these fake opposition groups have called on Iranian people to boycott the elections. And in each and every case, they have failed. For example, the last presidential elections that Iran had was in May of 2017. And the fake opposition did its best to convince Iranian people not to vote. And yet 75% of Iranian people voted in that elections. They also, for example, called for demonstrations in late December and early January, just about a month and a half ago. And nobody showed up for demonstrations that they had called for. So time and again it has been shown that they don't have any social base of support. And the main reason for it is that, first of all, Iranian people usually do not trust those that are outside Iran and from exile call on them, to take actions to do this or that, because they feel that while they are living in Iran and there are very difficult economic conditions, partly because of the corruption in the system and partly because of the harsh economic sanctions that the United States has imposed on them, these people live in exile. They have more or less a comfortable life, and then they ask Iranian inside Iran to make sacrifices so that someday they can go back to Iran and get to power. The other reason is that Iran's contemporary history is replete with foreign interventions. And for example, we all know that in 1953, Iran had a democratic elected government led by Prime Minister Dr. Mohammad Mossadegh. And because Mossadegh had nationalized Iranian oil industry, and there was a coup against his government, led by the CIA and the British MI6, that overthrew Dr. Mossadegh's government and put back in power Mohammad Reza Shah, the last king of Iran before the Iranian Revolution, that had fled the country, and that brought about 25 years of dictatorship by the Shah. That led to the revolution of 1979. So in general, Iranian people inside the country do not trust those that are outside and call on them to make sacrifices while they have more or less comfortable life in the West. So they don't have any social base of support, and as I said, this has been demonstrated time and again over the past many years.
So this fake opposition, are they trying to like recreate or reincarnate the 1953 coup?
No, I mean, they are not a state opposition. It's not clear to me what you mean by a state opposition. There are political groups that are inside Iran. I mean, Iran has many political groups, from left to right, from conservative to relatively liberal. And so there are all sorts of groups that are active. What they are trying to do is to first and foremost get the hardliners to actually implement the constitution that Iran currently has without any exceptions. Because one of the charges that opposition group inside Iran make, and it is also, and is the charge is actually true, is that a lot of things that the hardliners do in Iran are against the constitution that the country has. So the first demand is to put into effect the esprit and letter of the constitution. Once that is done, then they want for free elections in the sense that no candidate should be vetted. Anybody who is willing to run should be allowed to run. And then the third demand is that once they run and once their elections are held, the results of the elections should also be respected, in the sense that whoever wins the elections should be able to implement their program. So once these steps are taken, then of course we should also have the free press, so that press can debate all these issues, report on corruption, report on excessive use of power, and so on. And also political prisoners are released, and as I said, Iran has several hundred political prisoners. Then a national debate can begin about how to revise the constitution. Almost, or I shouldn't say almost, all democratic groups in Iran believe that Iranian constitution needs revisions because it has concentrated a lot of power in the hands of the supreme leader. And while the Iranian president is directly elected by the people and has to run the country on a day-to-day basis, the supreme leader has a lot of power, and a lot of times it abuses that power in favor of the hardliners and against the more liberal and democratic groups. So they think that the constitution should be revised, and at least at the first step, the power of the supreme leader should be drastically reduced, so that the elected representative of the people can do what people elected them to do in the first place. And of course, ultimately, we need to completely remove the position of supreme leader from the Iranian power hierarchy, so that Iran becomes a complete democratic system. The other problem that a lot of people have, including myself, and this has been also expressed by the Iranian people time and again, is the fact that over the past 40 years since the Iranian Revolution, the 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 political system has been basically a religious government, one in which Islam has played a fundamental role, and that experience has been a total failure. So what people want is to separate church and state, separate Islam and the government, so that the government and the political system is completely secular and democratic. Of course, we all know that, for example, in Western European countries, or even in this country, in Western European countries, for example, we know Christian Democrats are very powerful political parties, and they always participate in the democratic process. But even those political parties, Christian Democrats and similar groups, agree that if they are elected and get to power, they run the country on a secular basis. We also know that in this country, United States, religious groups are very active, and in fact, they are very influential within the Republican Party. So the question is not whether religious groups or political groups should be active in politics. The question is to separate church and state, so that even if a religious group gets elected to run the country, it should accept that the country should be run based on secular state, so that no religious group has any special rights or special advantages over any other group. So these are basically the demands that all the groups within Iran that have been involved in this struggle over the past 2-3 decades want. And they have been involved in it for a long time, as I said, and we have had demonstrations. For example, in 2009, when the presidential elections were held, people widely believed that there was fraud, so that the establishment candidate, Mahmoud Ahmadinejad, can be re-elected. And therefore, we had what we call the Green Movement, which was basically a civil movement, very peaceful and a broad-based coalition of people against the fraud in the elections. We have had other cases of demonstrations. We had last year demonstrations against bad economic conditions, which, as I said, are basically caused by two factors. One is corruption within the system, which is basically the result of hardliners holding most of the power. And the other reason is, of course, the external pressure, economic sanctions by the United States, and so on. After nuclear agreement was signed between Iran and the United States and 5 other countries, the 5 permanent member of the United Nations Security Council plus Germany, and President Obama lifted some of the American sanctions on Iran, Iran's economy started to grow. And in fact, it had very good rate of growth in 2016 and 2017. According to World Bank, Iran's economy grew by almost 6%. But then President Trump came to power and announced that he's going to leave the nuclear agreement and reimpose the economic sanctions. And that forced a lot of European corporations that had signed large agreements with Iran in order to invest in Iran and help grow the economy, withdrew from their agreements with Iran, and therefore the economy is in very bad shape. So there has been a lot of protests against this, and of course, when people see that in addition to the sanctions, there is a lot of corruption within their states, and some people have had special advantages over the rest, and have accumulated vast wealth, while a large fraction of the country is in bad economic conditions. Then naturally there would be demonstrations, and indeed we have had demonstrations against the corruptions and against the bad state of economy.
So do you think these foundations, specifically a foundation like the New Iran Foundation, which you mentioned in your article, do you think they've been a reason why there's been a policy shift from Obama to Trump towards Iran?
Well, first of all, we have to look at within the administration. John Bolton, the national security advisor to President Trump, has been advocating military attacks on Iran for many, many years. Even before he was appointed national security advisor, he had always advocated attacking Iran. In 2015, right before the nuclear agreement between Iran and 5+1 countries was signed, he published an op-ed in the New York Times in which he said, to prevent Iran bomb Iran. So he wanted Iran to be bombarded. Just a couple of days ago, he still claimed his erroneous, repeated his erroneous claim that Iranian leaders want to produce nuclear weapon. And this is why International Atomic Energy Agency has reported every 3 months since the signing of the nuclear agreement that Iran has abided by its obligations towards the agreement. Even though the United States has left the agreement, Iran has stayed in the agreement and has abided by its obligation. Then Bolton has always been for a long time a lobbyist, basically, for one of the exiled groups, the MEK, or the Mojahedin-e Khalq. And he has received, according to many documents, he has received large fees for acting as their lobby. He has given speeches in their gatherings. He has advocated their line and so on. So that's the national security advisor to the president. Then we have Secretary of State Mike Pompeo, who, when he was a congressman from Kansas, advocated that Iran should be bombed 2,000 times. He mentioned 2,000 sorties, so that all the Iranian nuclear facilities and military installations and so on can be completely destroyed. And he said that this is not difficult to do. We should easily be able to do that. He's also basically a Christian fundamentalist that has a very dark view of what he calls a struggle between Christianity or Western nations with what he calls a radical Islam. So that's our Secretary of State. There are other, of course, other administration officials that have the same point of view. And of course, we have Jared Kushner, the president's son-in-law, who is, of course, ardent supporter of Israel. We also have people like Sheldon Adelson, the casino magnate that owns billions of dollars worth of casino and in Las Vegas and elsewhere. And he has been a big contributor to Trump campaign for president. And he has a hard line towards Iran. In fact, he suggested before the signing of nuclear agreement with Iran in 2015, he suggested that the United States should drop a nuclear bomb in central Iran and issue a warning to Iran that if it doesn't stop its peaceful nuclear program, the next bomb will be dropped on Tehran, the capital of Iran, whose population is about 14 million. So when you have these people that are either within the administration or outside the administration, but support the president and his administration, then you can see why such a hardline policy towards Iran emerges. Now, a new foundation, the new Iran Foundation that you mentioned, if you look at, for example, its board of directors, this is also basically consists of people who have hardline towards Iran, take hardline towards Iran. That I have explained in the article that you mentioned. And of course, MEK, the Mujahedin-e Khalq, that I said Bolton is a lobbyist for them, also has very extensive lobbying operation in Iran, in the United States. Many politicians have acted as their lobbyists. They have been paid very handsomely. These are all documented, available on the internet. So we have all these groups supposedly Iranian groups, but they advocate the same hard line that Trump and his administration have towards Iran. And at the same time, we have, Iran hawks within the administration, like Pompeo and Bolton and so on. And then in the Senate, we also have Iran hardliners or Iran hawks. Senator Tom Cotton, for example, from Arkansas, he's an Iran hawk. We have Lindsey Graham of South Carolina. He has been always an Iran hawk. We have Robert Menendez of New Jersey. He has been a hardliner. Chuck Schumer of New York. They all have been hard on Iran hawk, and therefore, there is harmony when it comes to Iran between the administration and Senate and political activists and so on. So that's why we get ourselves into the situation that we are in right now.
Yeah, unfortunately, they use the pretext of radical Islam because it sounds scary enough where it can't be reasoned with, and it's ingrained. I'm going to say it's ingrained, especially in the Republican Party, but overall, it's pretty bipartisan.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
What would you say? Oh, go ahead.
No, it has been ingrained in in American politics. I mean, if you look at the past almost 40 years, ever since the hostage crisis of 1979, being anti-Iran and taking hard positions towards Iran has always been a staple of American politics. Anybody who wants to talk about foreign policy and wants to support of various groups in the United States takes a hard line towards Iran. And of course, we all know why that is, because Israeli lobby in the United States is very powerful. Saudi Arabia also has a very powerful lobby in the United States. That's also against Iran. And the new actors, such as the United Arab Emirates and so on, they are also very active in the anti-Iran crowd. So this has always been ingrained in American politics almost ever since the Iranian Revolution of 1979.
Yeah, and unfortunately, whenever you say something or question that narrative, you're labeled as an Iranian apologist. At least that's what I've heard from myself, or I've gotten labeled that before.
Yes. But the problem with such a view is that these people have a sort of a binary view. It is the view that George W. Bush had after September 11, 2001 terrorist attacks. He said that you're either with us or with the terrorists. No, there is a third element here. We are against the terrorists. We are also against adventurous policies that actually feed these terrorism. It's the same thing with Iran. It is not. There are not just two sides. One, the Iranian government or political establishment, and one, the United States establishment. The third element is the Iranian people. Iranian people oppose the vast portion of the policies of the ruling group in Iran, but they also oppose intervention in their internal affairs. They also oppose sanctions that hurt only ordinary people. These sanctions that the United States has imposed on Iran basically is targeted at ordinary people. It doesn't weaken the hardliners. In fact, if anything, it makes them more powerful. It makes them stronger. And while in the previous administration this was always denied, in the current administration this is not even denied. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo had an interview just this past Sunday with CBS in which he said that yes, the economic sanctions that we have imposed, have made Iranian people condition worse. They are in much worse conditions. So we are confident that if these conditions continue, they will rise up against the government. So they have basically targeted ordinary Iranians with the illusion that these, worsening economic conditions would force them to rise up against the government in Iran and basically topple the government. Now, if there were no outside intervention, and if Iran were not in a chaotic region like Middle East, where there is war and destruction and bloodshed everywhere, from Afghanistan to Iraq to Syria to Yemen to North Africa and so on, Iranian people may have tried to do such a thing, may have tried to rise up and try to get rid of their government. But as long as the Middle East is in the conditions that it is, Iranian people don't want Iran to become another Syria. Iranian people don't want Iran to become another Afghanistan or Iraq or Yemen or Libya or any of these countries in which war is going on. So they are wise enough not to do that. They are wise enough to, while protesting the bad economic conditions due to the corruptions that exist in the Iranian system, they are also aware, very well aware of the effect of the tough economic sanctions against Iran. On the anniversary of Iranian Revolution, just this past Tuesday, the president had this tweet about Iranian Revolution, and he attacked 40 years of Iranian Revolution, and he used this picture that a photographer within Iran had taken of some of these protests within Iran, and he used that in his tweet. That photographer lives in Iran, and she immediately responded to that, protested the president about using that picture, and said that while you have imposed economic sanctions on us, while you are hurting us with what you do, while you always advocate a tough line against us, and while I see our people are suffering because of your policy, you can't use the pictures that I took in your tweet against us. And there is this other political activist and political prisoner in Iran. He's in jail right now, and he issued this statement that activists spread it over the internet and cyberspace. He said that while he was in jail, he read that the State Department in Washington demanded his release from jail, and he said that Trump, Pompeo, and Bolton and people like that should shed crocodile tears elsewhere. Iranian people don't need their crocodile tears. They have imposed sanctions on Iran. They have made the lives of ordinary Iranians very miserable. They are constantly threatening Iran. They, try to ignite people like Bolton and Pompeo, try to ignite the war with Iran, and at the same time, they express, sympathy for Iranian people, which is nothing but crocodile tears. So that's the state that we are in. This is not you are either with them or with us. There is a third element here, and that's the Iranian people. The Iranian people oppose, the system that is there. They want a better system, a more representative system, a more democratic system. But they also oppose intervention by the United States and its allies in Iran internal affairs, the tough sanctions, the threat of military attacks, and so on. So the narrative that these people advocate that, if you express such facts, and these are all documented facts, then you are an apologist for the Islamic Republic, has no basis in reality. This is just propaganda.
It's crazy. And the statement or the belief that economic sanctions that harm the civilian population will help facilitate some type of positive regime change, I think people who endorse that opinion, I think they need either are just bold-faced lying, or if they believe it, they need to have their head examined. It's such an insane statement, and we've had so many examples throughout history when those economic sanctions just create a lot more ill will than positive change. Do you think that is there a way for America, or maybe even the average American or anyone in the Western world, to support true opposition groups in Iran, or would all of that just be counterproductive because it would be seen by the Iranian public as just working with the U.S.?
Well, I mean, there are anti-war groups in the United States, progressive people, those who oppose intervention in other people's affairs, are well aware of what's going on, regarding Iran. There is no question that the Iranian political system or the Iranian ruling group has done a lot of things that are opposed by U.S. political system, and one can reasonably judge them as not very helpful. But there are far worse actors in that region than Iran.
Absolutely.
For example, we all know that Saudi Arabia has been, one of the biggest supporters of terrorism. This is what even American politicians, highest officials, have acknowledged. In 2015, when Hillary Clinton was getting ready to run for president, in her emails to John Podesta, the Clintons' close aide, said that we know Saudi Arabia and United Arab Emirates and Qatar support ISIS and other terrorist groups. So what we need to do is to pressure them to stop this. Joe Biden, President Obama's vice president, in a speech in October of 2014 at Harvard University, said explicitly that when the war in Syria, the civil war in Syria started, our allies, which he named Saudi Arabia, United Arab Emirates, Turkey, and Qatar, said that whoever fights with the Assad government that is in power in Syria will be funded, trained, and supported by these four countries. And then he continued saying that, unfortunately, the only ones who were fighting or who are fighting with the Assad government are the terrorists. The Al-Qaeda branch in Syria, which is called Jabhat al-Nusra, and other radical Islamic groups. So he acknowledged that our allies support these terrorist groups, and yet it is Iran that is always labeled as the biggest supporters of terrorism. 15 out of 19 terrorists that attacked the United States on September 11, 2001 were Saudi citizens. Yet the ban on Muslims coming into this country doesn't include Saudi Arabia, but it includes Iran. So there's always this distortion about what Iran has done and what Iran hasn't done. Yes, Iran has a political system that hasn't been good to the Iranian people in a variety of in a variety of situations and for a variety of reasons. But even if you consider that political system with all of its shortcomings, with all of the things that it has done, and compare it with what we have in Saudi Arabia, Iran's political system is far better than whatever Saudi Arabia and its citizens have. As I said, in Iran, we have regular elections, which are not democratic by at least Western standards. They are meaningful and competitive, and they have consequences. In Saudi Arabia, we never have elections. They made a big deal last year about how Saudi Arabia allows women to drive now, and how Saudi citizens now have open movie theaters. in Iran, Iranian women have been voting for 60 years. Iranian women are present everywhere. 63% of all Iranian college students are women, and we have Iranian mayors, Iranian ambassadors, Iranian politicians, attorneys, university professors, all female, politicians, and so on and so forth. So they make a big deal about, a very tiny change in the Saudi Arabia, system, and while at the same time, while they say that, Saudi Arabian women now have the right to drive, and so that means that the political system is opening up. At the same time, the Saudi Arabian government has been arresting women rights activists, and several of them are actually in jail right now. That even the Trump administration has called on the Saudi government to release them. At the same time, for example, nothing is said about the discrimination and all sorts of economic pressure that Saudi Arabia government imposes against its own citizens, particularly the Shiite minority that lives in eastern Saudi Arabia and constitutes about 15% of the population. These are all, hidden here. They don't talk about it. Whereas if we make a comparison between those countries and those governments that we support directly or indirectly with our tax money and other things, like Saudi Arabia, like United Arab Emirates, like Bahrain, like Egypt, and so on, and compare them with what we have in Iran, Iran is way ahead of them. And yet, Iran is, the targeted country. Iran is a country that, behind everything that bad that has happened in the Middle East, whereas it was us that invaded Afghanistan, it was us that invaded Iraq, it is us that supports the genocidal war of Saudi Arabia in Yemen. It is us that supported the coup in Egypt that brought a military dictatorship that has 60,000 political prisoners in Egypt. It was us that attacked Libya, and it was us that intervened in Syria, and it is us that intervenes in Lebanon. And yet, everything bad that is happening in that region is because of Iran. This just does not agree with the reality of the situation. And yet, here we are in this very unfortunate and complicated situation.
And when Iran comes into another country, like, for example, Syria, they were invited into Syria. Is that correct?
Of course. I mean, Iran and Syria signed a defensive pact in 2006, according to which if any of the country is attacked by another country, the other side has to come to its aid. So Iran was obligated to aid the Syrian government. Now, I don't advocate intervention in Syria, but what I'm saying is once we admit, according to Vice President Joe Biden, that it was our allies, Saudi Arabia, Qatar, United Arab Emirates, and Turkey, plus Israel and so on, because Israel is also involved in Syrian war. Once they internationalized the war in Syria, which didn't have to be that, and in fact, I think if they hadn't internationalized, there would either not be a war in Syria, or even if there were, it would have ended very quickly. But once they internationalized the war in Syria, then nobody can blame Russia or Iran to come to assist their allies. Syria also has a friendship pact with Russia, according to which Russia is supposed to help the Syrian government. There is no question that hundreds of thousands of innocent people in Syria have been killed over the past 8 years. And there is no question that the Syrian army has committed a lot of war crimes. But the Syrian army is not the only party in this terrible war that has committed crimes. Most of the crimes have been committed by the terrorist groups that have been supported by outside powers. They always talked about, for a long time, they always talked about moderate Syrian opposition. There was no such moderate Syrian opposition. As Joe Biden said, the only ones that are fighting with the Assad governments are the terrorists. And these terrorists are supported by our allies. I mean, the speech exists. Just put it on in Google and in YouTube, and you will find it. And in fact, he was forced to apologize for saying that, which a foreign policy website said he was forced to apologize because he expressed the truth. So this is a situation, but we are never told that. Look, this is what we have done. John Kerry in a conversation that had with some of these opposition leaders, Syrian opposition leaders, in September of 2015, told them that the reason Russia and Iran intervened in Syria was that because the Syrian government was on the verge of collapse, and if it had collapsed, a radical Islamic group, ISIS, would have taken power in Syria, and both Iran and Russia consider that as a threat to their national security, which is true, because a lot of these, for example, terrorist groups that fought in Syria were Russian Chechens that moved from the Muslim part of Russia to Syria to fight with the Syrian government, and ISIS has always been a bloody enemy of Iran and Shiites in Iraq and elsewhere. In fact, they carried out a terrorist attacks in Iran several months ago in southern city of Ahvaz in province of Khuzestan in southern Iran. So even Joe Biden admitted that. John Kerry admitted that that was the reason for intervention, and yet we are never told these things. The mainstream media never expresses these facts. The mainstream media never says what we have done, and I should give credit to the President Trump, that has always said that we have spent $7 trillion in the Middle East and we got nothing in return, and this is actually true. And I give credit to him for saying that. He recognizes the problem. He recognizes that these problems started when we invaded Iraq on false pretense, based on lies. He recognizes the fact that we shouldn't have attacked Libya. He recognizes that we shouldn't have intervened in Syria. The president said many, many times the war in Syria is not our war. And he orders U.S. troops to leave Syria. But his Secretary of State and his National Security Advisor, and even James Mattis, the former Defense Secretary, opposed it, and they tried to slow it down, and they tried to put all sorts of conditions to it. So this is the situation we are in. But the mainstream media never discusses such important facts. They never tell people the truth about what's going on, and at the same time, they always make a very distorted, unreal image of Iran as the main evildoer in the Middle East.
And not only do they not tell the facts, the mainstream media is guilty of associating all these different groups into one. So whenever they report, for example, when Trump announced that he wanted to leave Syria, networks like CNN and MSNBC, they said that by leaving Syria, we would be empowering both ISIS, Iran, and Russia. How is that possible when Syria and Iran and Russia are fighting ISIS? It's just so ridiculous.
Yes, I mean, the fact of the matter is both Russia and Iran played a fundamental role in defeating ISIS. If in June of 2014, when ISIS all of a sudden came to prominence and took over, large part of western Iraq and northeast part of Syria, if it weren't for Iran's help to the Iraqi government, Baghdad, the capital of Iraq, would have fallen under control of ISIS. Even the Pentagon in the past has admitted that if it were for Iran's help, the Iraqi government in Baghdad would have collapsed in June of 2014. It was Iran and then Iran and Russia in Syria that prevented victory by terrorist groups and ISIS. And yet, nothing of that sort is said here. The only thing that they say is that Iran and Russia are present in Syria. Yes, they shouldn't be there. I totally agree. We should follow a non-intervention policy, but this non-intervention policy should be applicable to everybody. Nobody should have intervened in Syria. No country should have invaded Iraq. No country should have attacked Libya. No country should have invaded Afghanistan. We have been in Afghanistan for almost 18 years now. And what have we got? Tens of thousands of Afghans have died. The Taliban are probably more powerful than they were 17, 18 years ago, to the extent that now the Trump administration has been forced to actually negotiate with Taliban about leaving Afghanistan. And all of this has created a lot of resentments against the United States and what it has done in that part of the world. Whereas that $7 trillion that the president has always repeated that they have spent in the Middle East and got nothing in return, if a fraction of it, let's say $1 trillion of it, or less than $1 trillion of it, had been spent on repairing and fixing the infrastructure in this country, it would have done wonders. It would have created hundreds of thousands of good-paying jobs. It would have fixed the infrastructure of this country that is collapsing. Another part of it could have been spent on, helping the poor people, the needy people, and so on. And at the same time, it would have created a lot of goodwill in the people of that region towards the United States. If some of that money that we wasted on war had been given to them as, some sort of economic aid package, so that they could grow their own economy and stand on their own feet, and there would not have been any enmity between the people of this country and that country. But yet, those who won war, who won a permanent state of war, people like John Bolton, they always pursue this. They always advocate war with Iran. They advocate war with North Korea. It is as if we say what we say, and it should go what we say. Whatever we say, it should go. And that's why we are in the situation that we are in right now.
So I got one more question for you, and I'm going to let you go. So we had the Poland summit. I think it ended yesterday, if I'm not mistaken. And it seemed to be an attempt to, I guess, solidify a global anti-Iran coalition. Do you think, what's your take on that? I mean, was there any success in doing that?
No, it failed because, first of all, major allies of the United States, Western European countries, refused to participate, at least at the highest level. They sent probably some low-ranked diplomats just to be observers. They repeated the same type of rhetoric that they always repeat. Iran is that, this, and Iran is that. And they couldn't even agree on, issuing a statement at the end of the summit to, summarize what they had talked about. Even many Arab states, in fact, all of them that are supposedly a main part of this anti-Iran coalition, didn't send their, high officials to the summit. The only head of a state that participated in the summit was Benjamin Netanyahu of Israel. Mike Pompeo participated, and Vice President Mike Pence also participated, but that was it. And in fact, if you look at the picture of all the participants in the conference that they published, you practically don't recognize anybody except for Netanyahu, Pompeo, and Bolton, because all of the countries that did participate didn't really send any important or high-ranking officials. And, it was just basically like a show, show of a group of countries. Most of them are not even important players in the international arena. Went there just to please the Trump administration. Went there and they repeated whatever they repeated. And while the summit was going on, there was this terrorist attack in southeastern Iran. They attacked, a military convoy uh, and killed about 40 people. And these terrorists that staged these attacks are widely believed to be supported by Saudi Arabia. When Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman of Saudi Arabia says explicitly that we want to have a war with Iran and we want to take the war inside Iran, and then obviously when such terrorist attacks take place in Iran, even if it is not, even if they are not supported by Saudi Arabia, there is this suspicious that they are indeed supported by Saudi Arabia, and in fact, in this particular case, they are widely believed to be supported by Saudi Arabia, and there is whole history about the support of these groups by Saudi Arabia. And in fact, I have published at least a couple of articles about this, about the whole history, long history of support by Sunni Arab countries for these terrorist groups. So that was basically what happened in Poland. As at least as far as I can see, or at least as far as I can understand, nothing came out of it except the same rhetoric as always against Iran, and a show by Benjamin Netanyahu and his Arab allies.
Mohammed, where can we follow you? Where's the article that you publish is on Low Blog, but where else can we follow you?
I have published a large number of articles on Huffington Post. I have published on National Interest a large number of articles there. I regularly contribute to antiwar.com. I publish my articles there. I also have a very active Facebook page. If they just put my name, Muhammad Sahimi, on Facebook, they will immediately find it. So I'm active in many media. And I have published other places. I've published in Truth Dig. I have published in Truth Out these websites, and I have published many places. And my latest article that you mentioned was published by Low Blog, and I intend to publish more in Low Blog and continue to contribute to antiwar.com.
All right, excellent. Mohammed Sahimi, thank you so much for joining us today. This was great. I think that article that you in your work is very, very important, and hopefully we can do this again soon sometime.
Thank you once again for having me on your program, and I'll be happy to come back to your program.